Hey everybody, it's Rabbit. Welcome to the channel, and today we have the thrilling conclusion of the Magach Grind series. This is the last part in the video where we'll be looking at the last 4 vehicles, and as you can probably tell by the title, these vehicles are getting pretty long in the tooth to the point where the upgrades mostly just keep them from being completely useless. They don't really help them be particularly good. And you'll probably notice by the intro that the vehicle featured is actually the Merkava, not the Magach. And this is the real problem. The last battle rating adjustment put the Merkava 1B and 2B at 9.3 and also put the Magach 6B Gal and Magach 6C at 9.3 as well, and gave the Merkava 1B and 2B an improved shell. And the end result is that most of the time at 9.3, since you have 6 tanks, you're probably going to be taking out the 2 best, which is the Merkava 1B and 2B. So in context of this video, we're mostly at this point just looking at which of these is the best backup for your Merkava, not necessarily which one is good in its own right. It is a little disappointing that the compression got this bad in this battle rating adjustment, but this is currently where we're at. Hopefully in the future there will be some kind of like battle rating adjustment that will give these vehicles some breathing room, so they're not directly competing for effectively, objectively better vehicles. And to kick our vehicle off for today, we're going to have the Magach 6B Gal, which is actually the squadron vehicle for Israel. Now I hope you haven't put your drink away, because the Magach 6B Gal does have the new M60 turret, take a shot, and it has the overbarrel 50 cal, take a shot. Now the Magach 6M was the last vehicle with the older M60 turret. All the vehicles in this video will have the newer M60 turret. So the only thing the drinking game is really going to be relevant for is the overbarrel 50 cals for this session. Now the 6B Gal doesn't improve the engine at all. It also still has the Blazer ERA, although this is the last vehicle that will feature that upgrade. But what it really has going for it is that you get introduced to the M426 shell. This shell is an APF SDS round that has around 430 millimeters of maximum flat penetration, which is quite good. It's not amazing, but for a 9.3 vehicle, it's very competitive. Now, you do have this as a rank 4 modification, and at rank 1 you have the older M111, and this brings up an awkward question for me, because ultimately, all of these vehicles, they're not at this battle rating because they're armor, they're not at this battle rating because of their mobility. They're at this battle rating because of their shells. The only reason a vehicle is at its battle rating is because of its shell and it has no other real utility, then it should probably just get that shell as like a rank 1 or even a stock mod. Anyway, the 6B Gal does have a minor improvement over the 6M that we looked at previously. Number 1, it has a laser warning receiver. This is a reasonably helpful addition in that it tells you if you're being lased, and especially at 9.3, things like drones or even attack helicopters start showing up. So having the ability to know if they are firing a missile at you is pretty useful. Sometimes being able to know if somebody's firing a shell at you at longer ranges is also useful, but it's kind of a niche upgrade. Additionally, you also have slightly higher resolution thermals, so your ability to pick out targets or know exactly what it is at a distance is a little better than it was previously. However, that's really all you get, and it's important to note that at 9.3, the Magach really starts to lose a lot of its charm. Like, the M60 chassis starts to show its age pretty significantly. And what I mean by this is less objective and more subjective. So subjectively, the vehicle starts to feel a lot bigger. Not because it got particularly large, but more because a lot of the vehicles around it are the more lean, smaller modern vehicles. Or if they are big, they're wheeled vehicles where they have a lot of empty space that a shell can kind of get lost in. Additionally, this is where you start to feel really slow, especially in max up tiers to 10.3, where you start seeing stuff like the M1 KVT or the Leopard 2A4 that are both fairly big and heavy tanks, but also easily outrun you. This vehicle does start to feel pretty sluggish, as does basically all of these Magachs. Additionally, your armor starts to feel basically useless. The ERA packages feel essentially irrelevant. Most of the missiles you're getting hit by don't care about them. All of the APF SDS shells will go straight through them. The ERA is mostly just to give you a few extra seconds against an autocannon hitting you, and that's really about it. And this kind of leads these vehicles into this awkward, like, they're essentially a third line vehicle. If you spawn them late enough in the match, you might see vehicles your armor is effective against, your mobility is not as relevant, and the fact that your gun can still pin anything is pretty great. But that's really about their only role. As a first spawn, they're all kind of suboptimal. Now, as a bit of a side note about the Magach 6B Gal, it does have the 60mm smoke mortar, or that's used for a smoke mortar on multiple other Israeli vehicles on the side of the turret, but for some reason it's not functional. You don't have that. You don't have those smokes available from the word go, and you don't have additional smokes on top of your normal smoke launchers. So I'm not sure if this is a bug or like if it's just a visual anomaly or whatever, but it does appear to be missing that launcher, even though it visually has it. The real advantage, I would say, of the Magach 6B Gal is that if you're looking for a backup vehicle for your Merkavas, you can start researching it right away because it's a squadron vehicle and potentially have it done by the time you get to the Merkavas. And if that happens, you can kind of just ignore the last part of this tech tree and use this as the backup. It's not really critical that you use one of the other technically slightly better vehicles that we're going to discuss in this video, especially if it's like a third line backup. So overall, the 6B Gal, it's competent. It's almost the definition of fine. You're not going to be impressed by it, but you can certainly have good games in it. Now the next vehicle we're going to be looking at is the Magach 6C, and the only real change from the Magach 6B Gal to the Magach 6C is the doesn't have the overbarrel 50 cal. Take a shot. Now it may seem like it has some more differences. The tanks are visually kind of different. They use different models of ERA, but in practice the protection offered by that ERA is so negligible that it's not really worth mentioning, and overall the tanks will defensively end up being about the same. So it's really just that the 6B Gal has the 50 cal and the 6C doesn't, and that's the only thing you're going to notice in game. Now the only real merit the 6C has is that it's the earliest vehicle you're going to get that still has M426 if you're going down the tech tree and not getting a squadron vehicle. So you could get this and just kind of ignore the vehicles in the rest of this video. Wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. I don't think it's the best out of the group, but if you're just using a third line backup, it's perfectly fine. And again, perfectly fine is the watchword for a lot of these tanks. For our next vehicle, we're going to be looking at the Batash. Now the Batash does get the overbarrel 50 cal back. Take a shot, and that will be the end of the drinking game. Thanks to all those who participated, because the only other vehicle will have all of the same features as the Batash. Now the Batash does bring us a brand new feature that is very welcome. It brings us a noticeably more powerful engine. However, the engine isn't powerful enough to get the vehicle up to the speed that is really competitive with a lot of the enemies you're going to see, especially in max up tiers. It doesn't feel as tragic stock, but it's still nowhere near what it needs to be spaded, and this does make the vehicle still feel pretty sluggish, even though you are getting technically an upgrade. And it is kind of funny that after 12 vehicles with the exact same engine, we're finally getting a brand new one only for the last two. Now, one of the most noticeable features about the Batash is obviously all the composite armor that it gets, and of course the side skirts. In practical terms, this isn't great in terms of protecting you against other tanks with single shot guns, unless they're just loading their stock heat rounds because they haven't researched anything else. But against lighter weapons like autocannons and sub-missiles, it can provide a level of protection and sometimes get you out of trouble. It's not the most reliable armor package in the world. However, I did notice anecdotally the coverage of the armor was decent enough that opponents that struggled with you would kind of struggle with you from any angle. You wouldn't have obvious weak points. So I guess that is at least a point in its favor. Overall, if you are going to have one vehicle here and you want it to just unquestionably be the best option you could, my personal opinion is that the Batash is the best backup vehicle for the Merkavas going forward, even though it's not fantastic, but it's not awful by any means. And lastly, we have the Magach 7C, the last vehicle we're going to review in this video, the last vehicle in this line of the tech tree, and it is awful. So let's note the problems with the Magach 7C. First off, despite technically having better armor in certain areas than the Batash, the actual coverage of the armor is weaker. I noticed anecdotally that I was getting killed a lot more by autocannons in the 7C than the Batash. Additionally, one of the weird exclusions from this tank, and this might be a bug, is that it doesn't have a laser warning receiver. All of the other vehicles we've talked about in this video have the laser warning receiver, and this doesn't. And as I stated, at 9.3, it can be kind of important to know if something like a drone or a helicopter is targeting you. And of course, the last weird problem is that somehow it loses gun depression over the Batash, and I'm not really sure how it does that, given that it's basically the same turret, but it's whatever. So you have a lot of downgrades over the Batash, so what do you get as upgrades? Well, you have a slightly faster turret traverse, not so much that it'll really matter, and additionally, the armor in specific places is better against specific shell types. Honestly, I really prefer the more complete coverage the armor package on the Gal Batash allows, rather than the slightly improved coverage against certain shell types that you get with the 7C. Now we get into the elephant in the room with the Magach 7C, and that is the Magach 7C is the very last vehicle in the line, and this is where it gets the end of the line tax. Now, if you're a newer player and you haven't run into this before, vehicles that are at the very end of their given line in a tech tree, regardless of what battle rating or rank they're at, have a significant tax applied on all of their upgrades. So to give you an idea of how big this tax is, in order to research all of the modifications for the Gal Batash, you need around 260,000 RP plus or minus, which is a lot, but for a 9.3 vehicle, it's pretty like middle of the road. On Magach 7C, you need around 460,000, which makes it the second highest vehicle in the Israeli tech tree in terms of the amount of RP you need to spade it. So you will be spending a lot of time with this vehicle to get it up to the same level as the Gal Batash, and the Gal Batash is generally a better vehicle to begin with. To give you an idea of exactly how much this takes to spade, I actually ended up unlocking Desert Camo for this tank before I ended up spading it, which took me around 240 or so kills. That is a ridiculous amount of work for this vehicle. Now, admittedly, I kind of mentally checked out very early on in the process when a 2S38 punched around straight through my turret face and killed my turret crew, which honestly killed any of my motivation for playing this vehicle because you run into 2S38s all the time. But still, that is a ridiculous amount of kills to have to get to spade this vehicle, and at the end of the day, you get a pile of fine. Like, it's mediocre, it's meh. There's really nothing wholly remarkable about it, and the vehicle before it in the tech tree is arguably just better. So this is the vehicle in the tech tree that I would comfortably say you should go for the least. Simply unlocking it is a lot of work, crewing it is very expensive, getting it upgraded takes forever, and you're doing all of this for essentially a third tier backup. Honestly, even if I think some of the battle ratings get reshuffled, I really don't see this vehicle ever being worth it unless they get rid of the end of the line tax, and even then, the Gal Batash is just better. So yeah, the Magach 7C is a really bad way to end this tech tree out, and I imagine most people are going to quit well before they get this thing spaded. Closing things off with our final rankings, overall I would put the Magach 6B Gal, 6C, and the Gal Batash all in C tier. I think any of these are viable for a backup, it just kind of depends on how much work you're willing to put in. The Magach 7C is an F tier, don't touch it, don't go near it. It is absolutely not worth the effort. There's really just no payoff for spading that thing. And if we look at the distribution of vehicles in this tech tree, there's a lot of B tier, there's some C tier, very little A tier, and there's also some F tier. So overall, the tech tree experience as a whole is just going to be a lot of middle of the road, like slightly better, slightly worse than your opponent's vehicles, which is not really anything exciting, especially because outside of the Hydra, you don't have any like really crazy features to lean on. And a lot of the Magachs are just put at battle ratings where the things they have that would be special aren't special because they're too high. The Magach 6M being the best example, with the thermals and laser rangefinder being no longer that great at 9.0 as it was at 8.7. So overall, I just feel like there's a lot of very lackluster vehicles, and that's probably why a lot of people don't really like this particular branch of the tech tree and don't see this family of vehicles all that favorably. Overall, I think the best solution to the Magach grind is simply to folder a lot of these vehicles. There's a general lack of progression across them. You're fighting a lot of the same opponents with a lot of the same shells and a lot of the same chassis, and just foldering the vehicles so that you could jump for more meaningful progress, or you could stay at the same BR and pick and choose individual vehicles that you thought might be interesting, would be a big step forward. So for example, the Magach 2 could be spaded with the Magach 1. They're both very similar vehicles. The Magach 5 could be folded with the Magach 3. They have the same turret, they have the same hull, they have the same general design. The 6 and 6A are already folded. The Magach 6R, Magach 6 Hydra, and Magach 6M could all be folded. That would be perfectly fine. The Magach 6B and 6C could both be folded because they have the same turret and hull shape. And honestly, you could folder the 7C and the Gal Batash, and that would also work perfectly fine. The other thing is, I really think, as a general thing, Gaijin needs to remove the end of the line tax if a vehicle isn't max rank, because getting an end of the line tax on a 9.3 vehicle is incredibly rough. Basically, every time it shows up in the game, there's really no reason for the player to ever spade that vehicle. It's just going to take forever. So unless it just offers an amazing capability that you need for your lineups, you're better off skipping any vehicle that low in battle rating that is end of the line. So I think if it's not max rank, then it shouldn't have an end of the line tax. And I mean, that's really what you would need to do to make this less tedious to play, because a lot of the tedium comes from the volume and the lack of progress. It doesn't come from the individual vehicles just being outright bad. Like, as we can see, the vehicles that are outright bad and that I just hated playing were mostly the Magach 6A, because it's kind of surrounded by better vehicles, and the Magach 7C because it just took forever to get it up to like a very mediocre level, and the Batash was just kind of just better. The rest of the vehicles, I was either very ambivalent towards them, or I actually kind of enjoyed them. So it doesn't take that much to make this tech tree more interesting and more engaging for the player, but Gaijin does have to seriously look at foldering quite a few of these vehicles together to make that experience run a lot smoother. And that concludes our deep grind on the Magach series. Hope you enjoyed it, hope you have found it educational, and for anybody who actually did end up finishing the Magach drinking game or did the Magach challenge and did all these vehicles in one sitting, I salute you. Again, please drink responsibly, don't drink and drive. Please subscribe to the channel if you want more content like this. Leave a like, leave a comment, always appreciated. Have a nice day, everybody.